Hi everyone, thank you for taking your time to listen to our presentation today. This week's topic is about the globe. This is a significant topic as the world in which we live in today means we are interconnected across nations and borders. We could say that the globe as we know it today is made up of the history of slavery, migration, several nations and borders, and of modern day, the interconnection through technology. With globalization, the movement of people across regions has been developed, and it has become common for people to stay in other countries legally or illegally. Behind this, the creation of the US-Mexico border, for example, and other types of hardened borders in which we have looked at so far this term, work on the exclusion of different groups of people and reveal the phenomenon of dysphoria and the social problems behind it. The outline above shows the different perspectives we will walk through today and hopefully help you get a better understanding of the globe. Here is a visual outline of the key concepts in which we will walk through. We will begin by walking through the two key readings and one additional reading and the concepts and the key ideas behind it. We will present two different case studies relevant to contemporary world to the idea of dysphoria and hybridity, the hijab ban in France, and the case of international migrant workers in Singapore. Please note to keep these sub-concepts about the globe in mind as we begin to present, as these different concepts help us expand the conversation on migration, racialization, and space, which will be uncovered as we discuss the idea of the globe through the readings and case studies. To begin, Avatar Bra is a Ugandan British sociologist who created an important conversation. Her book, Categories of Dysphoria, throws light on the debates on the intersection of race, gender, and class. It works to provide an innovative theoretical framework for the study of difference, diversity, which links them to the analysis of dysphoria, border, and location, to contemporary migrations of people, capital, and culture. These are the four main concepts that can be drawn from her work. The main idea that can be drawn is the concept of dysphoria space, which refers to the location where concepts of dysphoria, border, and the politics of location are imminent along multiple axes of power. For example, many of today's dysphoria were made by the recent creation of empires like the British, Ottoman, French Empire, etc. If we look at it through this lens, this means many of today's dysphoria arises out of the subordination and colonization and expansion of empires. Therefore, it can be understood dysphoria is the ethno-political struggle and disposition which can be seen as a post-colonial phenomenon. Secondly, the idea of power applies to the conversation with minority discourses, arguing that dysphoria is more of a fitting term to deal with the multi-axis performative conception of power, which highlights the ways in which a group is constituted as a minority. With this in mind, the idea of intersectionality is integral, as it provides the foundation of decentering normative feminisms and challenges gendered forms of whiteness. It's through intersectionality that we may be able to consider our intersubjectivity, that the categories through which we are defined are interlocked in constant negotiation and are constructed and performed. And finally, Braha relates dysphoria to the notion of home. For these colonized groups, home remains elsewhere, which their citizenship in their newfound country is often contingent and revocable, even though often the contingents and lineages were created through the empire. A good example that relates to last week's lecture is the Windrush scandal, which hundreds of Commonwealth citizens arrived in the UK from Caribbean countries. In 2018, there were at least 83 cases who were wrongly deported from the UK by the Home Office. With this in mind, it's important to understand that your identity, your citizenship, is more than often always under question. Rah does a good job discussing many different sections of intersectionality. One interaction of being South Asian that is not often addressed is religion. Religion is a distinct lens of dysphoria that is often a certain idea that is left out. Looking into secularism versus religion will always remain in a space of understanding inequality. The French Act passed in 2010, resulting in the ban of wearing face-covering headgear, making France the first European country to impose ban on full face veils in public areas. Arguments supporting this proposal include that face coverings prevent the clear identification of a person, which may be a security risk, and that Muslims who continue this practice should be forced to assimilate into traditional French social norms. But the gender subtext of social tensions regarding the Muslim veil illustrate how sexuality and femininity are regulated through hegemonic discourse of the West. Therefore, the headscarf symbolizes alleged essential differences and is the ultimate sign of not belonging to the West. This imposed ban takes away the choice of freedom and reduces attainment and opportunities for Muslim women in French society. Thus, Europe's symbolic order keeps the invisibility of the migrant women to maintain the tensions between the tolerance and visibility of the other.
Thanks, Amira. And let's move to a methodological offering, which is Fidian's work of recentering the South in the studies of migration. So this is a collection of issues that the author draw the focus on in order to redress the Eurocentrism in migration study. To be specific, she examines the concepts of the South in different studies and claims that there is a lack of research attention on the South migration. And also, lastly, she examines the geopolitics of knowledge production. So this piece of introduction makes us rethink about the approach or perspective we take normally in research under this topic. And it reminds us that we need to look beyond the common or familiar topics around the migration studies, which sometimes likely from a Eurocentric lenses. So Fidian raises the question that historically the study of migration has been dominated by the north to south migration, but the significance of south to south migration, for example, the internal migration within the Africa, has not been emphasized. She claims that there is a need to recenter the South. So let's think about the South as a relation instead of a geographical concept. We may need voices outside of the field which contribute to the knowledge production process at the first place. So diverse field of study is facing the recentering and decentering question, as Fidian suggested, and an example is when Scarlett and Catherine mentioned about the recentering Black feminism, they suggest that we must be willing to search for knowledge and theory outside of our discipline. And another author, Noguchi, he advocates to put Africa to the center of international relations and the world politics. And he has brought decolonization into the picture. So he claims that decolonizing is not about closing the door to European or other traditions. It is about defining clearly what the center is. So it emphasizes the issue of our view towards center, and there is like an application of putting Africa to the spotlight. And when we think about the South, this concept, now we kind of know why the words like third world, developing world, we used to use very frequently. Because in the past, authors like Peace and Alice, they may suggest that countries that have been marginalized in the international political and economic system has been defined as the South. So this is why the issue comes partly, and also it shows us that there is a need to change. And as one way to address the question, a concept, the westernization, has been brought up. So there are debates around whether the capitalist economy and the rulemaking process, which are dominated by the Western players, are the key breaking point in this question. And finally, there is a quote that I like very much. It is urgent for us to focus intently on identifying and challenging the diverse structural barriers, including academic, political, economic, cultural, and social ones, that prevent certain people's understandings and the worldviews from being perceived as knowledge. So it shows the importance and significance of geopolitics, of knowledge production in the study of migration, and I guess in many different areas of study. Lastly, because this is a methodological review, so I link this to other literatures. For example, Kaminga's one, which we learned in week 2, it offers an example of South migration study through the interviews and different approaches. And Yu Huang's one, which David will introduce next, it also bring women's choices and voices into our attention.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. So, hi, guys, and I would like to talk about additional rating with contemporary examples. And in this part, I would like to just discuss ways like international women workers reconfigure their social identities under the condition of diaspora by using the Huang series and examples. And as Huang concludes, like for the women work across other borderlines, and they were just trying to maintain and strengthen their ties to their homeland, includes like in social, emotional, financial, and imaginary ways. And also the woman was trying to, on the other hand, was trying to just create a home away from home in a literary and mental theoretical ways. And as Levy mentions, like paradoxically, where description of material manifestations of diaspora are often couched in terms of catastrophic origins, and for diaspora and traumatic alienations, mental theoretical renderings tend to construct diaspora as a third place, with a strong potential for resistance, disruption, and liberations. And the diaspora is an in-between space of the subjectization that liberates the individual from the immense power relations in terms of the third space. So yes, the Huang suggests that because of those outsiders, the women, home and housewives and non-citizens, so they are just often triple excluded from the civil society, and draw a conclusion that the diaspora journeys as thus neither purely anticipatory or nor restorative, and rather they are just temporarily dependent on the confluence of circumstances and constantly excluded. And in this session, I would like to just discuss the factors that causes certain issues in Singapore. And firstly, it's about the micro factors, which simply is no Singaporean employers will just hire a man for domestic work. And at the same time, no Philippine man will stoop and to unpaid domestic work or work below his educational qualifications. And behind this sentence is an interview from about job choice from a Philippine woman. So as she mentioned, like the very well educated men had to choose their jobs. Like if the man is an engineer, and for example, he does not just choose to take a job lower than of the engineering. And yet, the interviewer herself is an educated woman who studied accounting but went to work as a man because she couldn't find the office job and feel like we had to be flexible. And this also reveals the gender issues behind this overseas works in Singapore. And rather than weakening the concept of family ties, women crossing over to work often helps to strengthen women's gender identity as the sacrificial sisters, doctors, mothers, and babes. And this burden of the child care is more likely to be transferred to female relatives than to husband across the gender divide. And it is therefore an open question like whether the woman's adventurous journeys in search of gainful employment are sometimes described as the gender altering journeys. And at the same time, like none of the women we interviewed feel like they had replaced financially and otherwise any living male members of the family, nor did they speak of their status being enhanced by their stay abroad. And their status as doctors, sisters, mothers, or wives is not suspended when they just leave home. Rather, they will just continue to play these roles across borders. And finally, it's the micro factors of thinkers, which is around the 1970s in last century. The Singapore was facing an issue of labor shortage, and this shortage of labor has pushed the Singapore government to just encourage the local women to enter to the labor markets, rather than just staying home and be like a housekeeping work. And however, like with more and more women entering the labor market, Singapore will suddenly face another crisis in the reproductive sectors. And as a result, the Singapore issues a work permit to allow the recruitment of the domestic workers from other countries. And therefore, when considering the international labors and migration issues, the both social and political economic factors should also be taken into account and considering. And just like no one wants to leave their home countries and join the completely different environments. So most do for a variety of financial reasons and social factors, like for the pure praise in the articles, for example, going to abroad and would not only pay for her family's living expenses, but it would also allow her to gain personal experiences for a better future. And also in the Week 2, the gender refugees who went to the South Africa, on the other hand, had to just leave their home country because of the gender identity issues.
Thank you for listening. When you do have time, please look at the discussion questions below. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.